whenever we have any kind of reading comp passage, these are taken from real things. So they're clearly writing them for some purpose, right? Like all of them, I think I sometimes forget this, that these passages were not originally written for the LSAT. They take them from something. So they were using them for something. Why might a science article be written, or an article about science?
Usually to like argue the point of whatever they're trying to make. Like it's usually two people arguing about some kind of theory or something being right or some person being wrong.
Yes. So science passages are either going to be, they're going to be extreme one way. They tend to be extreme one way. It's going to be like what Brittany said, where it's even it could be two people arguing about a different point of view, or it could be someone explaining like these are the 2 points of view, and I'm giving them, so it's almost, they're almost neutral, but they're giving the two extreme sides. Or it could be a science passages and they're like, this is the science. Look at me, I'm so scientific. This is the science and this is real, therefore this is fact. And so it's not as touchy feely, and so there's not as much emotion involved. And so whenever we go into these science passages relate to LR, like LR or logical reasoning stimuli, so much when it comes to like those must be true questions. Um, and especially that first paragraph, try to get into the habit of, after you read the first paragraph, asking yourself what kind of passage you think it is and who do you think it's written for. People typically do that at the end. I don't care if you get it, I do not care if you get it right after the first paragraph, but it's asking that question at the first paragraph then helps you know what to look for throughout the rest of them. I came, we were last night in our other, one of our other boot camp, or one of our extension classes, we did PT66 LR2, and it was the comparative passage about, one of them was in an appellate court and the other one was about the fingerprinting. Does everybody remember that? And a lot of people missed the question about, was it a judge or a prosecuting attorney? And I asked them, I'm like, if you asked yourself why this was being written after the first paragraph, you're not going to say a prosecuting attorney. You're like, it's probably a judge or something because of the language. I was like, if that was my attorney trying to get me off, I would be furious for the lack of like energy in that passage. Right. I'd be like, there's no opinion here. There's no persuasiveness. Like it was very neutral. And so those type of questions can kind of help us whenever we get to those questions. We're like, wait, it all could be right. So sorry, that's my spiel on reading comp. So for this one, Brittany, do you want to go ahead and I'll read the first paragraph. So at least one, so we're talking about a few of the philosophers find the traditional subjective approach to studying the mind outdated and ineffectual. So already I see strong language. But we're also talking about someone else. So I'm not the author. I'm saying like, hey, these other people think this and they have strong opinions. For them, and I like how it's also like we're like definitely putting like them in their own category. The attempt to describe the sensation of pain or anger, for example, or the awareness that one is aware, has been surpassed by advances in fields such as psychology, neuroscience, and cognitive science. So we're saying, like, hey, they say that um, how we describe these things have been passed, and other fields are just doing it better than us. Scientists, they claim. So the key part here is if we don't pay attention to this front part, I think it's easy for people to get confused that it definitely is a philosophers versus scientists thing. And so these philosophers are saying that scientists do not concern themselves with how a thing feels from the inside instead of investigating private evidence perceived only to a particular individual. And I laughed at this and I was like, yeah, I'm a philosopher and I think that about scientists. I'm like, don't you care about how I feel? Like you're like I'm more than just what you see on the outside. Um, Scientists pursue hard data, such as the study of how nerves transmit impulses to the brain, which is externally observable and can be described without reference to any particular point of view. So I'm like, yeah, they're just saying like, I'd be like, yeah, the scientists just point out what everybody can see. They don't get to like the meat of anything. But this is me taking an opinion that's not naturally true. But I'm siding with the philosophers because that's who I relate with, and it's going to help guide me through the passage. With respect to features of the universe, such as those investigated by chemistry, biology, and physics, this objective approach has been remarkably successful in yielding knowledge. Okay, so we're saying, like, hey, yeah, in respect to these certain topics, their, very objective, very, in my words, boring approach has been remarkably successful, okay, in getting information. Why these philosophers asked, should we suppose the mind to be any different? So why should we suppose the mind to be any different? Whenever we have a rhetorical question, oftentimes the answer to that question can be the main point of the whole passage.
Nicole, I was confused there. So the author is saying, wait, I'm just confused. So are the philosophers asking, why should we suppose the mind to be any different? And that's why, like, I thought the philosophers didn't like this objective approach. So in that last sentence,
I think they're going to answer that question is like why we should expect it to be different.
Okay. I think I might have just like read into it. And
yes, I think how I said it too didn't help what was happening at the end, like how I worded that question. Why these philosophers ask, should we suppose the mind to be any different?
Okay. Yeah.
I almost read it kind of sassy-ish in my head, which I don't know if that's helpful.
I actually think when you read it sassy, you get the right.
It like makes the next part make more sense.
Yes. I don't think they're asking it as if like we're right or the scientists are right. Why should we ask this? I definitely think they're asking it as why would the mind be any different than physics, biology, or chemistry? It's like all the same. And I think we're going to come back and like answer that question. Did anybody get anything different? You got maybe at the end when I read that question too, for a second, I was like, wait, did I just read that whole thing wrong? But no, I think I read it accurately. Did everybody pick up on all of that as they read, or were there anything that stood out to you that I didn't touch on?
I'm a very like word for word reader. Like I don't, I'm an introvert, so like I don't really have many emotions, or I try not to like do that stuff. So like I've tried to find a habit of trying to find some kind of emotion about something in these passages, but like I'm just trying to read like what the actual words are saying half of the time. I don't know, that's just me.
I don't think you're wrong for doing that in any way, and I think you can get good at it. I do think pausing to ask yourself, what does this actually mean, can be, rather than just reading it for words, but stopping and asking, what does this, I don't want to say in life, but how could I, even if you don't care, what does this look like in real life? And asking yourself to kind of make a connection to something. Does that help, Tyler?
Yeah, so like you're suggesting making an application somehow, some way to your, maybe not your own life, but something that
Yeah, so philosophers and scientists, do you like stop and think about what are the differences potential to philosophers and scientists? I think a lot of people blaze through this and they don't even catch up on, they just read it as a person of authority, and they don't just ponder like, wait, are philosophers and scientists the same thing? And they could be, but when we ask that question, then we're going to approach this really difficult passage in a completely different light. All right, you have the second paragraph, Malika.
But philosophers loyal to subjectivity are not persuaded by appeals to science when such appeals conflict with the data gathered by introspection. Knowledge, they argue, relies on the data of experience, which includes subjective experience. Why should philosophy ally itself with scientists who would reduce the sources of knowledge to only those data that can be discerned objectively? I read that last sentence, kind of funny.
Yeah, but okay, so this one, I think this is funny. But like I've read too many RC passages.
I don't think I enjoy this as much as you.
I've done too many RC passages in my life, truly. But I like, this is me like arguing with my dad where I'm like, yeah, but my feelings matter. And he's like, but objectively, this is what makes sense for you to go to law school. Or my brother's very like type A. And he'd be like, this is what you do, to be first place. And I'm like, yeah, but what about my feelings and how I feel after practice? And I have to, like my happiness of where I go to law school matters just as much as the debt and the ranking and whatever. That's how I would like apply this. And so essentially what's going on is they're saying philosophers that are loyal to subjectivity get mad at these scientists that are just talking about hardcore data. They're like, you're just a number. And they're like, how can you just just put me down to a number? Like, I'm more than a number. Did you guys get that from that? Cool. I don't go into that much. I don't spend that long on it when I'm actually reading it, but I do try to make an application of what this I try to relate to the fight happening. All right, Brittany, you got the third one.
On the face of it, seems unlikely that these two approaches to studying the mind could be reconciled. Because philosophy, unlike science, does not progress inexorably, however you say it, toward a single truth, disputes concerning the nature of the mind are bound to continue.
Okay, go ahead and stop there. I think this is a really key part to the whole when we get to the questions. Because so we're saying that these two things, it seems unlikely that these two things that have these different approaches, like that could ever work together. I just want to point this out. Whenever it directly compares them and it uses unlike science, that means that philosophy has this, and I mean, this is such basic, but philosophy has this and science does not. Where oftentimes it kind of, like sometimes we'll have a paragraph, it'll just talk, oh, philosophy has all these things and we just don't know about science. So that is, in a science passage, something like that is very strong. Just FYI. Okay, anyways.
But what is particularly distressing about the present debate is that genuine communication between the two sides is virtually impossible. For discourse to occur, there must be shared assumptions or beliefs. Starting from radically divergent perspectives, subjectivists and objectivists lack a common context in which to consider evidence presented from each other's perspectives.
Okay, so if you have, this might be a crappy question, but what do you think is like the most important part of this paragraph in form of like the structure of the whole passage?
That they will never agree because they're not starting from the same belief system.
Okay, that's accurately that's content-wise, yes. Think of this as a role question in LR. What is important about this paragraph in particular, and what in this paragraph?
I have no idea.
Okay, that it's kind of unique for a science passage, to be honest. It's a crappy question. We really start to get our author's opinion coming out here. Do we see that? Like where it says, but what is particularly distressing?
Oh, yeah.
That's really strong for a science passage. And so up to this point, we've kind of had in LR, I'd be like, this is our background information. We have background information and we say like, on the face of it, it seems this way. But then we have this but, right? And we're saying, but what is particularly distressing is this. And so I see a ton of opinion coming out here. And I'll be curious to see, now that we have this author's opinion, what direction does the rest of this passage go to either support this opinion about being distressing or potentially solving it?
I don't know if anyone else was doing this, but like they kept switching between subjectivists and objectivists and scientists and philosophers, and like that was hard for me to correspond. Like they were synonymous, but I had to match them up.
Like that philosophers were subjectivist and that scientists were objectivists. Yeah. I did not struggle with that as much, but that might be because I went on a rampage in my head after first paragraph over, like, when I think of subjective, I just think of feeling. So whenever I read subjective, I'm just like, oh, feelings, philosophers.
This has always been like a struggle for me. Like, what is subjective and objective? Like, I always get them mixed up. Yeah. Always.
So objective is like I can observe. Objective is observable, like factual. Okay. Subjective is like, oh, this tastes really good. Like that's subjective, right? Like there's where if I measure the sticky note, it's 6 inches, like nobody can argue with that. But if I say this food is really good, someone can argue with that.
Okay.
Is that, Brittany, you probably have a better description of that for second. What do you tell second grade? Do you teach second graders that?
Lord, no, we don't learn these words, but
I bet you learned that in 4th or 5th grade.
I will say, I do think of it as like subjects, like people are subjects and every subject is different. That's kind of what I think about in my head. And objects, they have objectives that they're following. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's like how I kind of kept it different.
I think of objectable, like objectable, I know that you can't argue with it. Where subjective, I think about subjective is just it depends on how you feel. I always just think of subjective and feelings, to be honest. I'm like, subjective is feelings. You're more objectable, probably, as a person. What do you think about it, Malika?
I also struggled at first, but then I think I just went back. I forced myself to like read back, and I think they talked about scientists like this objective approach, and then that just like clicked with me. But I like the idea of like actually thinking about the words a little deeper. I think that would have helped with like answering the questions.
Especially the level that you three are on, where like you're clearly are intellectual, where if you do take time to think, it's only going to help you, right? It's not like you're not going to come up with something. If you slow down to think, you're actually going to probably gather what they're saying. We said object. Oh, I do feel like I don't preach memorizing a bunch of vocabulary, but I do feel like those two words are, I do feel like you see those words a decent amount on the test. Okay. So then we say, for reason there must be shared assumptions or beliefs starting from radically divergent. And even this is so strong. I'm like, radically divergent perspectives. Like, so we're saying like, when I think of radical, I think very strong. And then the other part where I had to take a think about when it said unlike science, I was like, oh, direct comparison. This is cool. Like, this is probably important. It says like philosophy does not progress inexorably toward a single truth. I was thinking of like the Big Bang Theory and like how like Sheldon, I don't know if you've watched it, but Sheldon, like he has one opinion and like it's just fact. Like you can't get away from that truth. Like there's nothing, right? And that really helped me with science. And I was like, I started to see it more. Where I was like, okay, I can see why they would disagree, because scientists want there to be one fact. They want it to be one answer and they get peace in that. Where I don't get any peace in the fact that like if you put me in a box, like I can't do it. Like I want there to be options. And I can see where like I can now see where they think they can never work together because their goals are different. Okay, Tyler, go ahead and do the fourth paragraph.
The situation may be likened to a debate between adherents of different religions about the creation of the universe. While each religion may be confident that its cosmology is firmly grounded in its respective sacred text, there is little hope that conflicts between their competing cosmologies could be resolved by recourse to the text alone. Only further investigation into the authority of the texts themselves would be sufficient.
Be likened to a debate between adherents of different. Okay, so when it says so what is the use of the fourth paragraph, Tyler?
I mean, personally, I took this as just a little more context to the situation, but also I think they're setting, I mean, obviously I know this, but they're setting something up of like, or they're drawing upon what they said in the third paragraph a little more, but kind of making an analogy about it.
There you go. Yes, it's an analogy. So when you ask yourself, what's the role of the fourth paragraph? Like think about this as like a role question in LR. Like we're totally using an analogy. So, but okay, what's the analogy?
It's that so two religions have different beliefs about the creation of the universe, and they both have the same sacred texts or their same evidence, and they're never really going to agree with each other because they have their own texts.
Yeah, it's like my Bible is saying this, and like my Bible is truth, but you have this other book, and this is your truth. And if we're both, and they don't disagree, and that's where our whatever is founded. Yeah, there's never going to be reconciliation there. All right, who wants to do the last paragraph? All right, go for it, Malika.
What would be required to resolve the debate between the philosophers of mind then is an investigation into the authority of the differing perspectives. How rational is it to take the scientific description as the ideal way to understand the nature of consciousness? Conversely, how useful is it to rely solely on introspection for one's knowledge about the workings of the mind? Are there alternative ways of gaining such knowledge? In this debate, epistemology, the study of knowledge, may lead itself to the discovery of new forms of knowledge about how the mind works.
All right, so if I asked you, Maliko, if this was like an LR question, just the last paragraph, and I said, what's the main conclusion? What would you highlight as the main conclusion?
Okay. So I have two, when I was reading this, I highlighted the first sentence, what would be required to resolve the debate between the philosophers of mind, then as an investigation into the authority of their differing perspectives. And then I also highlighted in a different color the last sentence, in this debate, epistemology, the study of knowledge, may lead itself, that whole thing. So I guess if I were to find a conclusion, I would go with the first sentence just because I feel like that last sentence might be supporting this idea of what would be required to resolve this debate, and that there needs to be a debate to investigate.
I took the last one, like if it was this would never be an LR main conclusion question because I think you would have a hard time debating between the two. I took the first one as the more of like a main point than a main conclusion. Like this is the main point. And the last one is kind of like as a suggestion. So I agree. That first sentence, I think, is definitely like the gold of almost the whole passage. And the role of it is like this, which is unique for a science passage, is like we have an opinion. He's like, hey, we have this debate. This is what's needed. And then what he uses two questions, right, to help show how we should go about investigating it. Like these are the questions we should be asking to get how we can even go about finding that truth. So did everybody feel like they had so whenever you read it the first time, did you feel like you had that good of an understanding of it? Yeah, yes. Okay, I'm impressed. If you said yes, I'm like, oh, you guys are awesome. Okay, so whenever you got to the questions, which of the following most accurately summarizes the main point? What would you say is the main point, Brittany? Like how would you summarize that into your own words?
There are two debates there's a debate between the philosophers and the scientists, and it can never be resolved unless they look to a higher, like whoever authored it.
Authored what?
Authored the idea that you should only use feelings, or the idea that you should only use objective knowledge.
Okay, I think you're really close. Would anybody add anything to that or change anything?
I found it like the last paragraph, the same thing all the way until like unless they find common ground. Yeah, or yes, something like unless they merge those things together and find a different way to think. I don't know.
Yes, I think what you were saying, Brittany, until like to authored it, we're never gonna know which one actually is better unless we actually dig into this, right? And I think this author very much does think that the best approach is to actually have both of them. What answers did you guys say for number 21?
So I was
C. Oh, sorry.
No, I was stuck between C and D.
I had D. I was between C and D.
I was between C and D too, but I went with C.
Okay, I'm gonna go check my answer because that is not what I have.
That makes me feel a lot better about my answer, Nicole.
No, D. Okay, sorry. No, I think I just wrote it down wrong. Okay, we're good. Okay, you were down between C and D. Awesome. Okay, one of you are good. Okay, so C, because the subjectivist and objectivist approaches rest on diametrically opposed assumptions about the kinds of evidence to be used when studying the mind. So we're talking about that these two people are resting on completely different assumptions about the kinds of evidence that we should use. The only way to resolve the dispute is to compare the two approaches' success to obtain knowledge. Is this the only way?
I mean, no, but also I was looking more at the two approaches success. Like, I didn't think it really mattered about their. I mean, I guess it matters about their success, but I thought it was just like the way in which I
Oh,
don't
I
know.
thought you were saying yes. Resolve the dispute is to compare the two approaches' success. Yeah. Do we have to say that? Oh, this one we're gonna say like, well, the scientists have had a better year than the philosophers, so we're gonna go with their way. Do you see that, Brittany?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then, so when in doubt on reading comp, go mild. Where D says, although subjectivists and objectivists appear to employ or to use fundamentally or not things of irreconcilable approaches to the study of the mind, a common ground for debate, I love this, may be found. So we're not even guaranteeing it. We're like, may be found if both sides are willing to examine the authority of the evidence on which their competing theories depend. Which that's even what the word that you used, Brittany. Like I'm like, oh, who's writing it? How long did you all spend on this question?
A good minute.
Okay. Was it because it took just a while to read through them, or was it because you were struggling to cross off answers?
I struggled to cross off. Well, I didn't struggle to cross off like A, B, and E. I struggled to choose between the two that I had left.
Do you go into questions thinking that every answer is wrong?
I know I should, but not normally. But I'm usually pretty good at knocking off the ones that just kind of really suck and then get down to the trick answer and my answer.
So try on these ones where you're down to that. Ask yourself, like, which one can't, like, which one is like, truly try to find the wrong answer versus the right answer. I think you'll see, because I think that C, it's easier to find holes in than D. Do you agree? Like, I think that I feel like I have more problems with C than D.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. So for 22, when it's asking about what the author's belief of the current impasse, does anybody have, like, did anybody make a prediction of what they think is their current belief?
I would predict that it's just something about that they both need to get over their egos, basically, and try to understand the other side's view.
Yeah, that I'm like, he thinks they're a bunch of drama queens that can't get over themselves, and he's like, y'all need to just come together if you're gonna have any hope. What answers did we have for 22?
I don't
This
think
is,
I have any.
I want to take a step back. The reason I want to go into this is where I think people can pick up speed on reading comp is getting good at crossing off wrong answer choices. My approach is very similar then as to LR, where because I think a lot of people don't get confident on RC answers and then they spend like an extra minute on it, and those do add up. Okay, so what were we gonna say, Malika? Sorry, did you get to it?
I was between C and E.
C and E.
Yeah.
Well, I was between A and E. And I ended up going with A.
Okay. So let's start with what makes A wrong.
It cannot be overcome.
Yeah, I was like, does this author actually think it can never be overcome? That's way too strong. I read that and crossed it off right away. I didn't even consider it. I honestly crossed it off after reading it. A, gone. Let's go to E. It will prevent further progress unless alternative ways of gaining knowledge about the mind are discovered.
I crossed that one out.
Why?
Just because that the whole like until alternate ways of gaining knowledge, I felt like that one was kind of a trick because they used that phrase as a question in like the last paragraph. And that was just like another suggestion of like like one of the questions they could ask, but like the main point of that last paragraph was this debate that they need to have.
Yeah, maybe this author thinks that this is possible, but would this author like bet $1 billion on it's going to prevent progress until we have this new way? It's one, way too strong, and two, what is the other way that we can get progress?
By finding common ground or
By finding common ground. Yeah, and I think the author would think that's just as true as well. All right, so what about D? Did anybody like D? Okay, good. But why is D wrong?
I feel like it like throws shade at both of them. And like, yeah,
Easily correctable. Like this would be like me, that would be like me saying that the Republican and Democratic Party, the differences are easily corrected. Like, I mean, it might be like, I mean, there might be common things that would help us get there, but I don't think that's easily corrected. All right, so then between A and or B and C, which one do you like? I don't think anybody got it right, to be honest. What did you say, Malika? I'm sorry.
I didn't say an answer. I was crossing out wrong one, so I took the easy way out for this one.
Okay, so go ahead and tell me which one of these would you cross off then? That's wrong.
I would cross off C.
Okay, why?
I just don't like that they're saying it is unavoidable unless both sides recognize that. Yeah, I would say it's, yeah.
Yeah, and does this person ever say that I could be wrong on this, but I don't remember, this is me being picky, but I don't think the person ever says that do we ever actually say that we need both sides? Does the author ever actually say that?
No, I think the author might say that in talking about both sides, we might like learn more about knowledge as a concept.
Right, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee that like it requires like to have an accurate understanding. It requires both types. I think C is a very tricky wrong answer. I think it's a trick answer. And
Yeah.
then it's unavoidable. Is this impasse actually unavoidable? Like was it unavoidable? Like it was going to happen no matter what.
I mean, I guess it's kind of avoidable because both sides don't really want to have this debate.
Yeah, I that's what made me. When I read through this, I left B and C open, and then I went back and picked B. But it is resolvable only if. So we're introducing a necessary condition. So if we resolve it, what does that mean happened? And I think this comes directly from the passage. So if we even think about this as an LR question, truly, only if it's resolvable, what does that mean happened?
They found common ground.
Yeah, would the author agree with that? Yeah. Are you shaking your head yes, like you're like, oh yeah, that actually completely makes sense? Or you're like, no, not really. I don't love it because only if is strong, but it does. That was our whole conclusion in it. How do you feel about this one?
I just didn't like how we were supposed to find the fact that we were supposed to find common ground from the point where he's like, yeah, just investigate into the authority of the differing perspectives. Like, it was hard for me to find that connection between common ground in that statement.
To find common ground from which to access their competing conceptions.
The first.
Then it's investigating to the authority of the differing perspectives. I think what it's saying is that we find a common ground to actually talk about our differences. What it says, common ground from which to assess their competing conceptions of evidence. Like they're saying, like we need to find a place to talk about our different opinions. That's how I read B. Does that make sense? Or is that helping, Tyler, or is that not actually what your question was?
No, yeah, that helps.
I think this from which is throws us, like we're saying, like from which is kind of weird. Okay. All right, so why did the author write this, Brittany?
To maybe give an example of how they could figure it out, like how they could resolve what's happening.
Yeah, I would say, then what were other people's predictions there? Why did the author write it? I don't think you're way off, Brittany, by any means.
I thought they were kind of just saying like, get over yourselves.
Did they write it to say, do you think, okay, I feel like you guys need to put your thoughts together. So I think they were saying like, both of you are very stubborn. We're not going to go anywhere unless we do this. You agree? Like, I think he wanted to point out our weaknesses, which is what Tyler was saying. And then like what Brittany said, he or she wanted to suggest a solution. Because that's where the whole why I don't think that someone wrote this just to bash them and then ended in bashing. Like, this wasn't a hate article necessarily. Okay, so what answers did you have here?
I went with B, but I was also looking at E. I left E open, but ultimately went with B.
Okay, did anybody else have anything else?
But I want to pick B now.
Awesome. What did you say, Brittany?
I had A, B, and E left, but I went with B.
All right, so let's look into this. Like, why are some of these wrong? Okay, so I think E is the easiest one to cross off. Evaluate the legitimacy of differing conceptions of evidence advocated by. So whenever we use a word like evaluate, what does evaluate truly mean? That mean, you think about our evaluate questions. We're trying to think like, are they good or are they not good? Do we ever go through either one of this, like the scientists or the philosophers, and say, this is what they're really good at, this is what they're bad at, and just no. So really hold on to that evaluate word there. And then for A, did this author write it to suggest that there might be valid aspects to both approaches to studying the mind? I think that takes half of it, but I think the reason he said he wants to tell us like, hey, we have these two approaches, but we need to find that solution. Did Tyler, did you make a prediction to this one before you answered it? And if so, was your prediction just that he thought they were like dumb? Or that
yeah. I mean, I didn't state a prediction out loud, but I was like, yeah, I mean, I just never know where to find the primary purpose. Like, it's so hard for me, like these main idea points.
Do you do you take 10 seconds and tell something in your head of why you think the author wrote it?
Yeah, like I try to find language that like supports that purpose.
Would be required to this debate. Okay. So I used to struggle with main point and primary purpose questions a lot. And I got better at it when not to rehash, but when that first paragraph thing, I needed to remind myself to ask that question after the first paragraph to guide my thinking to be thinking about the author. Because I would ask myself at the beginning and then I would get to the end and I wouldn't have thought about it the whole time in between. And when I do that, I pick up on words and I always am looking for strong words. I'm like a strong word, like police. And I note it. I actually don't highlight on RC except strong words, like particularly distressing. Like, I think that's fun. I'm sorry, I don't need to think it's funny, but I do. Okay. All right, what about 24? According to the passages, subjectivists, so the philosophers, advance which one of the following claims and support their charge that objectiveness is faulty. Do you jump right in here or do you go look and find something first?
I jumped right in to cross out answers that like I thought I remembered didn't happen. And then I was left with answers and then I went back. I don't know if that was like the best approach, but
I think it depends on what kind of person you are and how quick you are. I'm naturally pretty quick. So I typically go up if I can't recall it. So the first thing that I want to do is ask myself, do I remember anything of like why they objected it? I'm going to see if I actually can recall it. It was something I feel like I said something about like they only like they don't care about their feelings. Like they limit it to just exerting the outside or something like that. But do you remember where it was at in here? Why should philosophy? Okay, so I'm gonna go in and think support their charge of it is faulty. Okay, so then I would do that, and then I would go through looking for wrong. So which ones did you cross off? What's one that you crossed off, Malika?
I crossed off C, and then I crossed off E.
Yep. Okay. So why is C wrong? Did you cross that one off? Like read it first, true, knew it wrong in 5 seconds. Yeah. Why?
I just don't think that was talked about or like relevant to the passage.
Yeah, mine was only by scientific specialists. Do they ever say that this data is real? Like only the sciences can read it? Nope. I crossed it off. That's why. Yeah. Okay. And then E, objectivism concerns itself with questions that have not traditionally been. Do we ever talk about what traditionally happened? Nope. Cross that one off. All right. What one would you cross off next, Brittany?
I also crossed off, let's see, A. I crossed off A. Let's see. Rests on evidence that conflicts with data of introspection. I just did not think that sounded right. I don't really have any good reason for that.
Okay.
I'm not doing well like backing myself. I think my brain is just not working well tonight. So
I don't think a lot of people when they teach RC force you to actually think this deeply about it. And so if you want me to go quicker, we can. But I think that this is how I got better and faster at RC, was actually analyzing this passages this deeply. Not that I do it on every single section, but on the hard ones, if I can do this, then I can do anything. So why is okay? Yeah. So there's a word that really makes this wrong. Or there's a like, okay, I'm gonna rest on evidence. Does objectiveness rest on, or is it built on evidence that conflicts with the data of introspection? Like, is that like what holds it up? No, it could, right? Like, I think that we do know that it could conflict, but it doesn't depend. Like, I think that objectivism could conflict with the data that we get from introspection, right? Oh, these are my feelings. And they're like, no, like you need to do this, but it's not required. All right, so which one would you cross off next?
I crossed off D.
Yeah, why?
Never really talked. It provides no context in which to view scientific data. I mean, first of all, it might provide context, but we never really talked about it.
Yeah. Like they don't, their reason for rejecting it is, yeah, you hit it, that they're like, the reason it's wrong is because they don't give context to how their data is relevant to our philosophical questions. No, we never say that. And no context is so strong. Where then B says we restrict the kinds of experience from which philosophers may draw knowledge. What are the kinds of experiences that they're referring to?
Feelings.
Yes, which includes subjective experiences, any of them. So they're saying anything that's going on internally where they're like, you don't do that, but I'm like, yeah, but let me tell you how I feel. Like, this matters. Yep. Okay. So the author discusses the work of scientists in lines 7 to 14 primarily too. Think of these as role questions again. Whenever you go up to 14 to 17, I normally read them again quickly to myself. I have to read what 14 is. With respect to the features of the universe, such as those investigated by chemistry, biology, and physics, this objective approach has been remarkably. Oh, am I doing the wrong ones?
I think so.
Oh, 7 to 14. I'm sorry.
7 to 14. Yeah.
Scientists, they claim, do not concern themselves with how a thing or event feels from the inside. Instead of investigating private evidence perceivable only to a particular individual, scientists pursue hard data, such as the study of how nerves transmit impulses to their brain, which is externally observable and can be described without reference to any particular point of view. So why does the author include those lines? And tell me in your own words what you think. Why?
I thought of it as like an example to show what this like hard data is and like where the scientific approach, like how us as the reader can see what the scientific approach exactly is. And that's like chemistry, physics, biology, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think they did it exactly to, yeah, you explained it. I think they included it to contrast, to show us specifically how our data can contrast and what that looks like. All right, so then what answer did you go with, Malika?
Okay, so I went with A, but I remember when I was doing this, I also thought about E a lot. But I don't know, I didn't go with that because it was just too direct. Like it just seemed like it was too obvious.
Okay, and these ones too, just like LR, bring your skills in here. Do we, you know, on rule questions, it's all about how does that statement or that sentence relate to the main conclusion? Do we use that example there to clarify why the objectives approach has been successful in disciplines? Do we use it to clarify, to be like, they were good, and let me show you just how good they were? No, that's why I would cross that off too. Like, I mean, you were right, Malika, but if you want to get faster at that. Did we have any other answers other than A here?
I didn't get this far, so
Okay.
Wait,
I read this question, but I hadn't answered it yet.
you said other than A?
Other than A, yeah.
Oh. Is A right?
Yeah.
No. Okay.
What did you have, Tyler?
I crossed out A. I thought that was a pretty easy one, but is this 25? Yeah.
Contrast the traditional approach to studying the mind with the approach advocated by. I didn't pick it the first time through. I left it open because I didn't think that we were contrasting it super hard, but it did do that. The role it played was to truly show us how these two datas are different.
I thought we're talking about the same person in that. Like some philosophers find the traditional subjective, never mind.
I thought the same thing though, Tyler. I thought it was saying the same thing. Like I thought the traditional approach was the objectivists.
No, the traditional approach is subjective.
Because it says, for them, the attempt to describe the sensation of pain, for example, or the awareness that one is aware has been surpassed by advances in fields, blah, 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 blah. And then it goes into say scientists.
Wait.
I'm so confused.
Okay, so on this passage, it says that philosophers find the traditional subjective approach. So the traditional approach is the subjective approach.
Where do they transition from?
This one was like one of the questions that I thought was tricky just because like I didn't know that like the traditionalists were the subjectivists who are the philosophers. Like I had to really think about that.
This is so the scientists they claim. So at this point, whatever you read this, did you ask yourself who they is? And so they is the philosophers, right? And so we're saying scientists they claim, like they're not saying like themselves we claim, like they're talking about someone else, and that's where the transition, like where the switch happens. And then do you see how but throughout here, so scientists they claim do not concern themselves with the feelings. Instead, they do this. That's where the contrast happens.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. If I had just connected the fact that traditional approach was the philosophers, that answer makes a lot more sense.
What do you think, Tyler?
Yeah, I'm getting it now.
I
They
think
change.
this is a passage where if you don't grasp the first paragraph completely, this is a passage people could bomb, truly bomb. And it is a level 5 passage. What's analogous? Okay. Do you want to do the last 3 questions on your own and switch to LR? Or do you want to go over these last 3 questions? I'm cool either way. Anybody have opinion?
I hate this passage, so I could do this later.
Yeah,
I don't know what it is. I can't like process it tonight.
I think this is a great one to try again in 2 weeks. Like, it's hard. Do you feel like you got anything out of it, or is it still just like, wait, this is just too much?
I mean, I think I got a lot out of it, especially since my answers are so wrong. Like figuring out how wrong my answers were.
I guess that's what I want to focus on is even if this passage sucks, try to make the applicable piece here of how we dive into the answer choices. So even on hard passages, the takeaway is, am I focusing on these words, and is every word to this answer accurate and can be defended? If not, it's wrong. I would rather you cross every single answer off on the whole test than think that there's 3 right answers.
I mean, I gained some good techniques. Like, I mean, they're, like you said, after you're done with the first pass or paragraph, like think, why is this author writing it? I think that's going to help me answer the main point in primary purpose questions a lot better. I mean, even though in this passage, like comparatively, it changed. Like, I mean, it changed a little bit until the last paragraph where like we finally saw what that was. But
I agree. Like, if I read this first one, I would be like, so far we're just talking about 2 sides, and the first one I'd be like, I was like, we're talking about 2 sides and we don't really have an author opinion at all until this point. And even that is helpful when you get to these author purpose questions and stuff. Like, if you had resonated that after the first paragraph. And I'm always looking for when the author's voice comes in. Like, I'm like, oh, here's the author. We found you. Okay, so let's go to LR. I don't need to end the meeting.